attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Guidry, and I'd like to welcome you to the Dibble Institute's second Wednesday webinar called Putting Youth Relationship Education on the Child Welfare Agenda, Findings from Research and Evaluation. I'm excited to have Dr. Mindy Scott and Dr. April Wilson from Child Trends as our presenters today. I also want to welcome Kay Reed, the Executive Director of the Dibble Institute. Hi, Kay.
Hi, Kathy.
Before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few little webinar information and housekeeping tips. If for some reason you're unable to access audio through your computer, you may use your phone. You might want to jot down the phone number and the access code that you see on your screen in case you need that later on. All the attendees are muted, but we're going to definitely have ways for you to participate. First of all, there's the opportunity to type any questions about technology or questions about the webinar in the questions box that you see in the control panel. It would be helpful, because we're having the questions at the end of the webinar, if you would write them down on a piece of paper and then later on type them up into the question box. That way Kay will be able to read through them very easily. The second thing you'll be able to do is raise your hand. And if you look in your control panel, you'll see a little hand. And when April or Mindy ask a question and ask you to raise your hand, you just have to click on that hand, and it'll actually read it as a hand raising. This webinar is being recorded and it will be archived within 3 business days on our website at www.dibbleinstitute.org/webinars-archives/. Let's talk a little bit about the Dibble Institute for those of you who are not familiar with us. These are our founders, Charlie Dibble and his wife Helen. Charlie was an engineer by trade, and as an engineer, he liked solutions. Some 30 years ago, he saw how young people's relationships and those of their parents were affecting the outcomes of young people, and not all in a positive way. So he began to ask many questions from lead experts in the field of relationship education. He asked, what are you doing to convey to young people the need for creating stable and strong families? So it was with the lack of strong answers that Charlie decided that it was necessary to take research and supply materials to young people that would enhance their romantic relationships. And so here the Dibble Institute is, 30 years later, helping young people to have access to relationship education materials. The Dibble Institute is an international, independent, nonprofit, research-based organization. We are able to reach many young people thanks to your efforts in partnering with us. We could not have reached the 1.5 million young people that we have in the last 10 years without you. Many thanks to you, and our hats go off to all the work that you do in the field. I'd like to talk briefly about the core values of the Dibble Institute. First and foremost, we believe in research, and we go where the research leads. We base our materials on what the research tells us. It is important to Dibble that we keep our materials up to date with the most current research. Secondly, we believe in stable, healthy families. Although we know there are trends, we follow the research once again. Research shows that children do best when raised by their own 2 parents. Research also shows that children do best when parents are together. We do understand that not all families have 2 parents. There are many single parents who do great jobs and have great outcomes with their children, but we do know how difficult single parenting can be. We also do believe that high conflict, abusive situations are not good for children, and those relationships are better being apart. Finally, the Dibble Institute believes that all people deserve to be treated with respect. All relationships get better, stronger, and healthier with relationship education. Our materials are suitable for all kinds of relationships. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Mindy Scott and Dr. April Wilson, our presenters for today. Mindy Scott is a senior research scientist at Child Trends. Child Trends is the nation's leading nonprofit research organization focusing on improving the lives of children, youth, and families. She is involved in a number of research and evaluation projects focusing on healthy marriage, responsible fatherhood, and teen pregnancy prevention. She has conducted research on 1, adolescent and young adult relationships, 2, the association between adolescent risky sexual behaviors and young adult reproductive health outcomes. And 3, healthy marriage and relationship education for teens and adults, with a focus on youth in foster care, complex families, young males, and other vulnerable populations. April Wilson is a developmental researcher with Child Trends. Her work at Child Trends includes healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood evaluations, teen pregnancy prevention evaluations, and kinship care diversion research. She also leads the technical assistance efforts for Pregnancy Assistance Fund grantees. April's research has been published in the Journal of Marriage and Family and as reports from legislators, state agencies, and the Institute of Education Sciences. She has also contributed articles in the Dallas Morning News and the San Antonio Express News. And our first speaker is going to be Mindy. Hi, Mindy.
Hi, Kathy. Thanks for that introduction. And good afternoon, everybody. We're excited to be presenting today on some findings from a literature review that Child Trends and It's My Community conducted a few years ago, where we were looking at research and evaluation findings on the importance of relationships and relationship education for youth in foster care. And I'll focus on findings from that initial review, and then April is going to present some preliminary results from an updated review of programs for youth in foster care and other vulnerable populations. But before we begin that, I just want to give a little bit more background on our organization, Child Trends. And here I wanted to first ask the group to use that hand-raising function that Kathy mentioned and tell us if you've heard of Child Trends before. It will help us just to get an idea of how familiar you all are with our work.
Okay. It looks like about maybe a quarter of the people have heard of Child Trends before.
Okay, well that's great. Thank you for letting us know that. For folks who have not heard of us before, and also for those who have heard of us but may want more information about what we do, here are just a few key points about Child Trends. We're, as Kathy mentioned, a nonprofit independent research center, and we're located outside of Washington, D.C. And we work to improve the lives and prospects of children and youth, and we do that by conducting high-quality research and then sharing the knowledge from that research with key stakeholders, including practitioners and policymakers. Across all of our work, we incorporate a number of key approaches. We take a whole child approach, which means we study children at every stage of development, from infancy to early adulthood, and we look across all domains of their lives and of well-being. We also study children and youth of all ages and social groups. We seek ways to help children flourish, so rather than just focusing on negative outcomes, we look at strengths and positive outcomes. We value objectivity and rigor in all of our work. We pursue both knowledge development and knowledge transfer. As I mentioned, we do focus a lot on communicating our research findings to a broad range of audiences. And we bring diverse expertise in various methodologies and broad research topics to help inform all of our work. And our website is on this slide, www.childtrends.org, if you want to take a look at some of our work and our projects. Okay, next slide. So I think everybody here would support the idea that positive relationships are important for the development and well-being of all youth. As part of this presentation, I'll focus on findings from research and practice that support this claim about the importance of relationships, but we'll also highlight some of the gaps in the evidence base for relationship education programs, and with a particular focus on youth in foster care. Next slide. We started this work with the idea that relationships matter intrinsically. They are important for the healthy development of children and youth, and they matter at all stages of development, from infancy to adolescence and also into young adulthood. Next slide. The relationships that individuals form earlier in life also help youth develop the skills they need to establish and maintain healthy intimate or romantic relationships. Research suggests that positive romantic relationships can be important for helping vulnerable youth achieve their goals. Knowing how to manage these types of relationships can make a difference as youth make decisions related to other areas of their lives, including school, employment, establishing more positive peer relationships, and also teen pregnancy. Next slide. Positive relationships, whether romantic or otherwise, are important for all youth, but we're really interested in better understanding the importance of these relationships for more vulnerable groups of adolescents, including youth in foster care. And before we talk more about this population, I wanted to get a sense of from the audience about how many people are currently working with youth in foster care. So if you could raise your hand again, and Kathy will take a look and give us a sense of the participants and how much you're involved with youth in foster care.
Looks like, again, about 25%.
Okay, great. That's helpful to get a sense of how many of our listeners are already working with this population versus participants who may be interested in hoping to learn more about how to connect with this group. So the importance of focusing on youth in foster care is really draws from a number of factors. Youth in foster care can face abuse and neglect, and often face unstable and turbulent family experiences, which can create a number of challenges for these youth. Research suggests that youth in foster care tend to experience a greater level of risk-taking behavior, often have a lack of supportive and caring adults that can help them make decisions and that can model positive relationships for youth to observe. And youth in foster care also experience challenges in establishing and maintaining their own positive romantic relationships. Next slide. Because of the many vulnerabilities experienced by youth in foster care, positive relationships are particularly important for helping this group overcome some of the serious challenges that they can face. The importance of relationships for promoting healthy development, including the skills needed for healthy romantic relationships, and the potential spillover effects of these relationships into other areas of life, such as school and employment, can hopefully help to address many of these challenges. Next slide. Unfortunately, the importance of relationships, and particularly romantic relationships, is often overlooked, especially for young people. This body of research is still fairly young and really only suggestive at this point of how the effects of adolescent romantic relationships can actually help or hinder development. Work that has been done also focuses more on negative rather than positive aspects of relationships. So there is more work and research and evaluation on intimate partner violence, or early and rapid sexualization of relationships, and also teen parenthood. There has also been a lack of attention to this issue and its potential importance by many key stakeholders, including policymakers, practitioners, and funders, and also we'll look at some of the research gaps in this area. Next slide. There is research and evaluation evidence that social skills matter for youth, and we know that these skills are an important component of establishing and maintaining positive relationships. So we can build off of what we know about social skills. Children with positive social skills are more likely to have higher self-esteem, have more positive relationships with their peers, and to achieve in school. And on the other hand, deficits in social skills have been linked to more aggressive behaviors such as bullying, fighting, or delinquency. Another important factor is that there is evidence that social skills are malleable and more subject to change, making them important targets for interventions. And we'll hear more about different types of social skills interventions and some of the effective strategies used in those programs later. Okay, next slide. Given the existing research on the importance of relationships, we are interested in better understanding how relationship education interventions can help to improve youth relationship skills and the quality of their relationships. And we're also interested in learning more about current interventions and the types of services that are most effective in improving relationships among youth in foster care. Although youth in foster care represent a large number of vulnerable youth, Their numbers really are relatively small enough that we think they can be served by effective programs. And it is our belief that relationship education interventions can help support efforts to improve relationships among this group of youth. So now I want to just give some background on the research and literature review that we conducted. To identify programs that may work for youth in foster care, we conducted a literature review focusing on existing relationship education programs. The review consisted of a broad literature search of both published and unpublished articles, also reviews of programs and evaluation findings. And we also reached out to researchers, program evaluators, and program practitioners to ask them for recommendations of specific programs that we should review. Our initial review focused specifically on programs that address romantic relationships, but April is going to provide more information about how we've expanded our approach for the updated review. Next slide. To categorize the various programs that we identified, we developed a set of inclusion criteria based on a program's target population, on the type of intervention, so whether they were a relationship education intervention or a type of program that had certain relationship education components, whether the program had been evaluated and the type of evaluation that it had undergone. And then if programs had been evaluated, we looked at the types of outcomes examined. Based on the criteria, we developed 6 different program levels where the programs sort of sorted themselves. And I can go through each of the levels fairly quickly. So level 1 consists of relationship education programs for youth, specifically for youth in foster care, that had been evaluated using a randomized controlled treatment design. So this would be the most rigorous type of evaluation. And if you click to the next slide, level 2 is described here. These were also relationship education programs evaluated using a randomized controlled treatment design or other more rigorous types of evaluation methods like a quasi-experimental design, but the programs had been implemented and evaluated with populations other than youth in foster care. And then if we look at level 3 on the next slide, this group consisted of programs for youth in foster care that had been evaluated using experimental, more rigorous evaluation methods that were not strictly relationship education programs, but they had a relationship component as part of a broader range of program components. So an example of this type of program could be a teen pregnancy prevention program, for example, that incorporated a relationship component. For level 4 on the next slide, we identified another set of evaluated programs, although these programs had not undergone more rigorous evaluations through a randomized controlled trial, but still had some evaluation evidence. These programs had a relationship education component that addressed romantic relationships, but relationship outcomes weren't actually assessed as part of the evaluation. For these programs, many of the evaluations tended to look at sexual activity or pregnancy outcomes, but did not directly assess aspects of a healthy relationship as outcomes. For example, looking at improved communication skills, improved conflict management skills, or relationship quality. Okay, next slide. For our next level of programs, we identified relationship education programs or programs that had a relationship education component that had not undergone a formal evaluation, but were evidence-informed based on basic research and theory. And then the next slide, our last category, level 6, we actually identified or created 2 separate subcategories. The first consists of programs that had been evaluated and had already been implemented with youth in foster care that didn't have a relationship education component at the time, but were sort of structured or seemed suitable for adding on a relationship education component as an expansion of the program. And then the final level, level 6B, was similar in terms of not having a relationship education component currently, those programs had not been implemented yet with youth in foster care, but again seemed suitable for augmenting with a relationship education component. Okay, next slide. So we don't have a lot of time to go through all of the programs that we identified through our review, but this table is showing you how the initial set of programs sort of fell into each of our categories. And the report, which we'll have a link for the report, and actually in the handout section on your screen, there is a link to the full report. And in that report, we provide detailed summaries of the programs and a summary of the evaluation evidence for each of the programs. Just a few takeaways from here. If you look at this table, you'll see that level 1 is actually empty. And again, this category represents would represent the strongest programs that would consist of rigorously evaluated programs that were specific relationship education interventions and that were specifically serving youth in foster care. So unfortunately, we didn't find any programs that fell into this category, and we think that this really highlights some of the gaps in the knowledge and evidence base for relationship education programming, specifically for youth in foster care. We did find a number of evaluated relationship education programs in level 2 that could be implemented with youth in foster care, as well as programs that had some level of positive evaluation findings that included a relationship component, even if they weren't strictly relationship education interventions, and that were already targeting youth in foster care. And those are sort of sorted across the rest of the categories. Okay, so that is a summary of our initial review, and now I want to pass things over to April, who will provide a summary of the more recent updates that we've made to our review, and then we'll provide some general conclusions and recommendations that we've drawn from this review and looking across all the programs. So thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mindy. So as Mindy mentioned, the programs that she reviewed were part of a report that was published a couple of years ago. And programs are constantly being added and evaluated, so we just wanted to update our review for this webinar today. So we conducted a preliminary search for relationship programs that target foster youth or other vulnerable youth. Now, please do keep in mind that the results that I'm about to review truly are preliminary. There may be other programs and evaluations that we have not reviewed yet. So as part of this update, we felt that it was important to consider relationships in a slightly broader way than a pure focus on romantic relationships. So foster youth frequently have experienced a variety of strained and even dysfunctional interpersonal relationships in their lives, and they often struggle to develop and sustain positive relationships throughout their lives. These youth are likely to benefit from a variety of relationship building interventions. So we broadened our definition of relationships in this review to include programs that attempt to improve peer and family relationships, interpersonal communication skills, and other skills that are inherent to forming a healthy relationship. We also added another level of evidence category to capture rigorously evaluated programs that target vulnerable youth, even if not specific to foster youth. So next slide. So specifically, we added category 3B, which consists of programs for vulnerable youth that have been evaluated using that randomized control treatment design, which again is the most rigorous design, that have a relationship component as part of a broader range of program components. So just like the previous category 3 that Mindy described, this category 3B, it requires that rigorous control design, and it has a relationship component. The only distinctions are that the program may be currently implemented with vulnerable youth generally rather than foster youth specifically. And then, of course, we're using our broader definition of relationships here. So next slide. So we added some programs to levels 2, 3, our new 3B category, and 6B. And again, this is just our preliminary review, but it's interesting that we still have not identified a relationship education program specifically designed for youth in foster care that's been evaluated using a randomized controlled treatment design. which is our level 1 classification. And I think maybe the emphasis, the graphics here are off, but if you look at the box for level 2, we've added 2 programs. So just as a reminder, this level includes relationship education programs that have been evaluated using a randomized controlled design or a high-quality quasi-experimental design for any population. So both of these 2 programs meet our broader definition of relationship education programs because neither focus exclusively on romantic relationships. In fact, both of these programs really focus on social skill building and interpersonal communication. So now if you look at our level 3, we added multidimensional treatment foster care program to our level 3. And again, this is a program for youth in foster care that has been evaluated using a randomized control design with a relationship component as part of a broader range of program components. So more specifically, this program provides behavioral treatment for severely delinquent and emotionally disturbed youth with foster care placements in the community to combat delinquency and encourage pro-social behavior. So relationship building is just one of the many components in this program. Okay, next, our level 3B, our new classification, is just like that level 3, except these programs target vulnerable youth rather than foster youth specifically. And so here we added 3 programs. So multidimensional family therapy is a family-based program that targets adolescents with or at risk of experiencing internalizing and externalizing symptoms of substance abuse, delinquency, as well as school conduct and behavioral problems and disorders. So the treatment here focuses on strengthening the interdependency between the adolescent, parent, family, and community. And many of you have probably heard of Big Brothers, Big Sisters, which is a program that pairs vulnerable youth with an adult mentor to promote the development of positive one-on-one relationships. And the title of the other program provides a pretty clear description. This program seeks to improve social and academic skills for socially isolated or rejected boys. And here, the relationship education component is more developmentally appropriate for younger boys in elementary school as opposed to during adolescence. So then on our last category, 6B, we added 3 programs, which contain other evaluated programs that could be augmented with a relationship education component. So the Runaway Intervention Program targets sexually exploited runaway girls, and it involves home visiting and case management. This is a population that may benefit strongly from relationship education as they've already experienced extreme interpersonal dysfunction. The Let's Talk Runaway Prevention curriculum aims to prevent running away in vulnerable youth, and the curriculum focuses specifically on life skill building. So it's possible that a relationship component could be added. And finally, you have the Strengthening Families program, which also focuses on life skills and family relationships. It's often targeted toward building the relationship between parents and youth, but the program really could be expanded to include more direct relationship training and skill building for youth in a variety of contexts. So next slide. So in summary, we reviewed a total of 38 programs in this webinar. 29 were part of that initial study, and you can find the link to that report on the bottom of the slide. And as Mindy mentioned, you can also see it as an attachment in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel. And then there were 9 programs that were added for this presentation today. So of the total 38 programs, there were 7 programs that target foster youth specifically. And then another 4 programs that focus on romantic relationships as their core program focus. And then 2 others that focus predominantly on relationships more broadly. And then there were 12 programs that include a romantic relationship component, and 4 others that include a more broad relationship component from the update that I just reviewed. So next slide. So we developed a number of overall conclusions based on this work. First, we have a considerable amount of evidence about the serious problems and poor outcomes faced by adolescents in the foster care system. There also are compelling research findings on the importance of positive relationships, but there's still a lack of rigorously evaluated relationship programs for youth in foster care. So again, we don't have any of those programs in level 1. There are a number of relationship education programs that exist that serve vulnerable populations of youth, and this number of programs expands further if we consider programs that aim to improve all types of interpersonal relationships rather than just romantic relationships. So we really can use the lessons learned from all of these programs and their evaluations to help develop effective interventions that specifically target our youth in foster care. Next slide. So we developed some key recommendations based on our review. First, based on the research literature, we believe policymakers and public administrators should recognize positive relationships as an important and legitimate outcome for youth in foster care. Also, establishing healthy relationships may lead to a variety of other positive outcomes for these youth. Relationship education programs that address the needs of youth in foster care and other highly vulnerable populations also need to be developed. And funding needs to be made available to develop strong programs for youth in foster care in order to bring programs to a stage where they can be evaluated. So specifically, core components need to be identified, and the program should be manualized, assessed, refined, and rigorously evaluated. To assess impacts, relationship education programs need to be rigorously evaluated, ideally in that random assignment evaluation, or secondarily in another high-quality type of design, quasi-experimental evaluation. Now, this evaluation of programs serving youth in foster care also should have an adequate sample size to assess impacts overall, and then also across subgroups. So, for example, determining whether the program is more effective for males versus females. Relationship outcomes should be included, if possible, among all the outcomes that are assessed in other youth development program evaluations. And relationship education programs for youth in foster care, they're hypothesized to be more successful if they're integrated into existing services for youth in foster care, rather than provided as standalone programs. So in other words, relationship education should be incorporated in a tiered approach to address the multiple needs of youth in foster care, as well as other vulnerable youth. And finally, program and curriculum developers should consider strategies known to be effective from prior research. So next slide. So for example, if a program seeks to enhance social skills, prior research has established several effective strategies. So in a review that Child Trends researchers conducted of 38 rigorously evaluated programs, they established several specific suggestions. And again, you can see this report as another handout in the GoToWebinar panel. So for instance, programs seem to be the most effective when they are implemented in a community or in a school-based setting. Programs also are more effective if they involve parents and peers for 6 to 11-year-olds, and when they include peers specifically for adolescents. The delivery method also seems to make a difference. So intervention strategies were often more effective when they combine some level of teaching, modeling, and coaching to promote positive social skills, and when they infuse technology like a DVD into their curriculum. And teachers seem to be particularly effective as intervention facilitators, but paraprofessionals and/or researchers can be effective as well. And of course, the content matters. So when trying to promote social skills, programs were most effective when problem-solving skills were taught, and when a variety of skills were taught, such as self-regulation, problem-solving, and conflict resolution skills. So again, this is just one example of the type of information out there for those designing a program, and we still don't know the overall effectiveness with foster youth because there are so few evaluations with this population. But that being said, it's important to learn from what other programs have already done. So next slide. So as part of this work, we also developed a logic model that depicts the key program elements that we identified as critical for successfully improving relationship skills and other related short-term and long-term outcomes for vulnerable youth. We hope that this model can serve as a useful tool for designing, planning, implementing, and evaluating existing and future relationship education programs for youth in foster care. So if we look at this model more carefully, we can see that a program that invests in romantic relationship education, positive role models and mentors, social skills training, adult training of foster parents and caseworkers, pregnancy and sexually transmitted infection prevention, identity development and group counseling, and programs that provide services or activities focused on knowledge about elements of healthy relationships, the importance of education, work, delaying sex, and or childbearing, as well as attitudes or values regarding healthy relationships, education, work, sex, or childbearing, and skills in social, romantic, school, and work relationships. Those type of programs are likely to achieve positive outcomes in the short term, such as greater relationship quality, decreased suspension or expulsion for fighting, increased rates of high school graduation, enhanced social skills, and greater stability in all out-of-home placement. And in the long term, these programs could lead foster youth to show increased success in education, work, relationships or marriage, and parenting and co-parenting. It could lead them to be more assertive of their rights and to show a greater sense of belonging and self-concept and improved mental health, and then reduce domestic violence and trauma. Next slide. So this concludes the presentation portion of our findings, and we've included our contact information for your reference, and we welcome anyone to reach out to us anytime for further discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, April and Mindy. You've really shared a lot of great information, and we know in the relationship education field that research is so very important, and it can lead us to new materials and new information as well. So thank you so much for sharing. I'd like to ask Kay Reed, our Executive Director, did you have something that you would like to add to the webinar today?
Thank you, Kathy. Well, actually, I have a question for Mindy and April first. So when we think about the lives of foster youth, it's obviously apparent that there are 100 levers that need to be pulled, right? There's education and, excuse me, placement and housing and health and, everything else we do for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious as to what you think either the unique needs are of foster youth or the benefits of focusing on helping, especially older adolescents, let's say 14 and up, helping them focus on their love lives. What do you think either the benefits of pulling that specific lever are or the needs they would have to focus not just on soft skills in general, which is another of the levers, but specifically around their romantic lives?
Yeah, this is Mindy. I think that's a great question, and I can start, and if April wants to add anything. I think that, and this is something that Kay and I have talked about before, that if we're thinking about how we can best reach youth in terms of teaching some of those important relationship skills, I do think that starting with the romantic relationship is maybe the way to keep them most engaged. It's such an important part of adolescence. They're exploring relationships, developing new romantic relationships, and that we're thinking that if you focus on romantic relationships, it will then benefit youth in other areas of their lives. And there's some research to show that you can sort of affect peer relationships, relationships with teachers, and those general social skills, relationship skills by first focusing on romantic relationship skills. And I think for youth in foster care, there's sort of this unique need because of some of the challenges that they face in establishing positive relationships, whether with their biological parents, with their foster parents, and then with also with peers and partners. So there's sort of potentially a lack of role modeling and exposure to healthy relationship behaviors. And so there really is this additional need for supports around that. And if there is a way to integrate those kinds of relationship skills education with, I agree, an array of other services that they're getting. And we did hear, as part of this review that we did a few years ago, we had a forum in DC, and we had a youth and foster care advisory panel. And we did hear that there's a challenge because they're sort of involved in so many different things, and people are throwing services at them from every direction. And so there is the challenge of integrating yet another service. So we do think it's an important element, and we'll have that spillover into other areas.
Yeah, I think Mindy really captured that really well, and I would add that from even just a prevention standpoint or developmental standpoint, we know from other research that adults who were previous foster children or foster adolescents in particular have higher rates of interpersonal violence and some other challenges. And so there's also an opportunity here to help establish positive role models and positive lessons earlier in life. I know this was something talked about in the child welfare arena, is how do we sort of break those cycles?
Okay, that's really helpful, because I just, to me, I think, the research, I think, is that a disproportionate number of young people in foster youth get pregnant as teenagers, or certainly unplanned. A disproportionate number of them can be involved in, as you say, sexual assault and intimate partner violence, and another, disproportionate number of them can be involved in sex trafficking. So it would feel like, especially with older youth, focusing on the romantic side would be really helpful, as you say, to see all these, to see this as a really missing link that isn't addressed by, like, how to get along with your buddy. So we're thrilled, of course, that we didn't know this when they were doing the research, but when Child Trends did the research, they identified, I think I saw 6 programs up there that come through the Dibble Institute in the categories 2, I think 3 and 4, 2, 4, and 5, something like that. And it's a very, as they said, a very fluid field. We've just had the announcement that Love Notes, which the research was done with foster youth, so I'll make sure that you at Child Trends see this, is effective, highly effective as a pregnancy prevention tool. So it's a validation for this point that working on romantic relationships has all kinds of benefits. Let's see, someone is writing in here. I guess that was a question. Oh, here's a question. So it's much easier to reach foster youth in mixed groups versus by themselves. In schools, they don't say, would all the foster kids come to Mrs. Smith's class after lunch? So any thoughts on how to, reaching foster youth, either, especially since we're most likely to reach them, if you're not going through the traditional child welfare channels, you're going to see them in a mixed setting.
So I can, this is April, I can speak to one idea. There are states and in many districts and at the school district level and then at schools as well, that have a representative from the state agency or from the local child welfare agency that are supposed to be the child advocate for all foster youth in that area. Mm. And so one thing that might be a strategy is to find out who that person is. And again, not all districts have them. Some states mandate it, but not all states do, and not all school districts do. But if your school district, if your area does, that is a really valuable resource because they will have the pool of all available foster youth in that area. They'll at least know who they are and can deliver messages. They can't necessarily tell you who they are, but they can give information, and they are a trusted source. So that's just an important relationship that could be established.
Good point. Yeah, I think federal funding requires that there be or some kind of, at least in California where I am, requires that there be a district person who's kind of in charge of the vulnerable youth. So it would be foster and then homeless and those who are dropping out. So that actually may be, as you said, you looked at programs that looked at all vulnerable youth, not just foster youth, and that might be another way to reach a larger population, including foster youth, but more young people if we went down the at-risk vulnerable youth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I was going to mention too. You know, you're not singling out youth in foster care in a school or community-based setting, but if you're working to really reach the most vulnerable, there's so many co-occurring experiences. So if you're kind of targeting general homeless and runaways, young parents, a number of risk, simultaneous risk factors, I think you'll end up reaching a larger proportion of youth who also happen to have been involved in the foster system at some point.
Okay, here's a question. Obviously, there are many variables, but what is the best program or curricula for at-risk foster care youth out of the 38 program studies? Is there a listing of the most effective programs for vulnerable youth or foster care youth?
That's a really, that's a tough question. I would say, you know, the logic model that we developed in our recommendations is sort of based on a synthesis of effective practices across all of the programs, but the report has each of the programs written up in more detail, so you can sort of compare and contrast the levels of evidence and what outcomes were successful. But I think in picking a curriculum, it would depend a lot on your location, your setting, your population. So I think I don't want to say there's one best program, but there are elements of successful programs that you can sort of review and compare and contrast and identify the curricula that seem the most effective or feasible for your context, I would say.
And Kyle, I would, Kyle who wrote this question, I would concur. We spend all day long working with people trying to help them select the best programs for their populations, and I'm sure all the other publishers that are represented there do the same kind of thing. And you know, we can go over the pros and cons of various approaches, but in the end, we really think the best people to make that decision are those on the ground who know your community standards, the setting you're using it in, the young people you're dealing with, what kind of setting it is, et cetera, et cetera. If there was just one answer, we'd all be doing that. But we're all looking at different sides of the elephant, you know, thinking of that old story, that Hindu story. So I'd encourage you to, certainly you can be in touch with us and we can set you up with sample lessons or review copies of our materials, and I'm sure others on that list would do the same. But it's a great effort to make, to really make sure that what you get fits, and you practice some, you know, try some things out and see how it works. Thank you. Are there any other questions people have? Going, gone?
Okay.
Okay, Kathy, back
Well,
to you.
I've got a few more slides here. I want to thank you for joining us today. We do have a brief survey after the webinar that helps us to actually be able to get in touch with you if you have specific questions and specific needs that we can help you with. Also remember that the webinar will be recorded and archived. You will get an email about this, and it's at our website at the link below. I do want to give a little plug. I guess this is our little advertisement from Dibble. We are excited to offer a training in Columbus, Ohio. It is going to be offered on 2 days of Love Notes and/or 2 days of Relationship Smarts Plus. The first 27th and 28th of June will be the Love Notes training, and the 29th and 30th will be the Relationship Smarts Plus training. If you need more information about that, you can give me a call. I will be making a PDF out of this PowerPoint, so you'll be able to go back over and look at the particular screens that you want. And please get in touch with us. This is an excellent way to meet with other people, learn how to implement one of our programs, and kind of talk with other folks that use our programs or are going to use our programs as well. Of course, we want to keep in touch with you. You have our website. Please feel free to subscribe to our newsletter. We give lots of funding resources in our newsletter, up-to-date research and articles. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on LinkedIn. There's our 1-800 number, and then mine and Kay's emails are there too if you'd like to get a hold of us. And lastly, again, thank you so much, April and Mindy, for presenting for us today. And we also are going to have another great presenter for our June 8th, 2016 webinar. It's Dr. Lawrence Steinberg is a professor of psychology at Temple University. He's actually considered to be one of the world's leading experts on adolescence. And he has authored the book, The Age of Opportunity, Lessons from the New Science of Adolescence. So we're very excited to have him with us. And registration for that will be available beginning tomorrow. And you will get an email about that, as well as you can go on our website under webinars. So again, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all you do for our youth. And stay in touch with us. If you need us, give us a call. Thank you, and you have a great day.